Hi judgers! Welcome to another segment of Juan R. Liwag Memorial High School Senior High School Math TV. Last time, we were able to determine the standard equation of the hyperbola given the center located at the origin. What if the center is not anymore located at the origin? What if it is now located at HK? Therefore, this is how we solve for the coordinates of the foci, vertices, covertices, the dimension of the auxiliary rectangle, and the equation of the asymptotes if the center is now located at HK. Again, we have two theorems. And for those two theorems, one theorem is transverse axis horizontal and the other theorem is transverse axis vertical. Always remember that the positive term is always the transverse axis. Let's have an example. For theorem 1, center located at HK, it is x minus h quantity squared over a squared minus y minus k quantity squared over b squared is equal to 1. If this is the case, all we have to do is to analyze first which term is positive. In this case, this is the positive term. And the positive term always comes with a squared. Again, the denominator of the positive term is always a squared. And therefore, let us now try to find out a squared comes with x. Therefore, our transverse axis is horizontal. And we will be calling this as, this becomes tax, transverse axis horizontal. So, if that is transverse axis horizontal, we could say that we could find the vertices and the foci on the horizontal. Okay? Since the center is not anymore located at the origin, therefore, we will be adding the variables a and c to the x-coordinate of the center. And the x-coordinate of the center is h. Therefore, the foci will contain the variable c, and it becomes h plus minus c k. Since we are having transverse axis x, we are changing the value of x. We are adding and subtracting from the x of the center. Okay, and for the vertices, the variable is a. Therefore, it becomes h plus minus a k. And for the covertices, therefore, the covertices is the y-axis. Therefore, we'll be changing the y-coordinate of the center. And this becomes h k plus minus b. Okay, so if we would be plotting, so this will be the center. Let's say this is the center. Since we are changing the value of x, this is the center, this is v1, this is v2, this is f1, this is f2. This would be w1, this is w2. In plotting the auxiliary rectangle, just connect v1, w1, and v2. Some books will not tell you to plot the covertices. Again, some books will not tell you to plot the covertices. I am only plotting the covertices so that I will not anymore have a hard time in plotting or in drawing the auxiliary rectangle. Remember that the auxiliary rectangle, its diagonals would be the asymptotes of the hyperbola. Okay? And the intersection of the asymptotes of the hyperbola would be the center. Okay? So, this will be the graph of the hyperbola with center located at HK and the transverse axis is horizontal. Sir, what will now be the equation of the asymptotes if this would be given? Okay, again, for the auxiliary rectangle, the dimension of the auxiliary rectangle is just 2a by 2b. Same with the next theorem. For the asymptotes, let us get again the equation. So this becomes x minus h quantity squared over a squared minus y minus k quantity squared over b squared is equal to 1. I am not teaching you the formula for the asymptotes. I want you to just remember that in getting the equation of the asymptotes is just you need to equate the equation to 0 and just get the variable y, and then that is now the equation of the asymptotes. So it is not anymore b, It is not anymore equal to 1, therefore this is equal to 0, and this becomes x minus h quantity squared over a squared is equal to y minus k quantity squared over b squared. Cross multiply b squared to the other side, therefore this becomes b squared over a squared times x minus h quantity squared is equal to y minus k quantity squared. Get the square root of both sides, and in getting the square root, this becomes square root of b squared over a squared, that is plus minus b over a times x minus h is equal to y minus k. And since we are only getting the value of y, I need to transpose negative k to the other side. Therefore, this becomes k plus minus b over a times x minus h is equal to y. Or, I will just arrange. This becomes y is equal to plus minus b over a times x minus h plus k. So this will now be the equation of the asymptotes if we have the transverse axis horizontal. Again, this will now be the equation of the asymptotes. So what happens if we'll now be having transverse axis y? For transverse axis y, look at this equation. So this is transverse axis y. So transverse axis vertical. So we'll be calling this as transverse axis vertical. And in transverse axis vertical, look at the equation. The equation is y minus k quantity squared over a squared minus x minus h quantity squared over b squared is equal to 1. In this case, the positive side now, or the positive term now, is y. And it comes with a squared. Therefore, that is the transverse axis. And the conjugate axis, or the minor axis, is the x-axis. Since we have transverse axis vertical, therefore, what will be changing will be the y-coordinate of the center for the foci and the vertices. So, since the center is located at hk, therefore, the foci is h. We are changing the y-coordinate, that is k plus minus c. For the vertices, that becomes h k plus minus a. For the co-vertices, we'll now be having h plus minus b k. Since the conjugate axis is the x-axis, we are now changing the value of the x-axis. So that is how we solve for the coordinates of the foci, vertices, and co-vertices if the center is located at hk and the transverse axis is vertical. So let us now try to graph. Since this is transverse axis vertical, we could find, or we could locate that the vertices and the foci are located at the y-axis. Okay? So this is the center. Okay? So assume that this is the center. This is the center. This would be V1. This would be V1. This is V1. This is F1. This is V2. This is our F2. Okay, so to the right and to the left of the center, that becomes W1 and W2. So this is our auxiliary rectangle. Just connect the co-vertices and the vertices. And the diagonals of the auxiliary rectangle will serve as our asymptotes. Since we have here the focus, together they're called foci. So therefore, this hyperbola is opening up and down. Okay? Okay, so this is now the hyperbola opening up and down because the transverse axis is vertical. So, the auxiliary rectangle would be the same. The dimensions would always be 2a by 2b or 2b by 2a. So, for the asymptotes, as I have mentioned earlier, all you have to do is to write the equation y minus k quantity squared over a squared minus x minus h quantity squared over b squared. It is not anymore equal to 1. We need to equate it to 0. Equating this to 0, if this is negative, we transfer this out to the right side. That is y minus k quantity squared over a squared minus or equal to x minus h quantity squared over b squared. Okay, since this is the case, all I have to do is to cross multiply, and I'll be having y minus k quantity squared is equal to a squared over b squared times x minus h quantity squared. Get the square root of both sides, get the square root of both sides. Therefore, square root of y minus k quantity squared cancel out square root, and this becomes y minus k is equal to square root of a squared over b squared, that is plus minus a over b, square root of x minus h quantity squared, cancel out square root, that becomes x minus h. Okay, since we have y minus k, that is now y is equal to plus minus a over b times x minus h, negative k, transfer it out to the right side, that becomes plus k. And this is now the equation of the asymptote if the transverse axis is vertical. Again, this is not just one equation. This will be two equations, one positive and one negative. Same is true with transverse axis horizontal. Again, this is how we get the coordinates of the foci, the vertices, and the covertices. And also, this is how we solve for the equation of the asymptotes. Again, I will repeat that in solving for the equation of the asymptotes is just you need to write the formula and equate it to 0, or write the equation and equate it to 0, and then solve for the variable y. Again, you need to solve for the variable y because that is the equation of the asymptotes. So I hope everything is clear with all the theorems that I have discussed. This will now be the formula and the theorems that we will be using if the center is located at hk, and this will be the formula that we'll be using in order for us to locate the foci, the vertices, the covertices, and to draw the auxiliary rectangle and to write the equation of the asymptotes. Remember that the equation of the asymptotes, or the asymptotes, are just the diagonals of the auxiliary rectangle. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have suggestions, please do not hesitate to message me on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. You could also access my DepEd email. You could send me an email for your clarifications. Once again, I am Engineer Jod Edward Hernandez, saying that mathematics is always fun. Goodbye and God bless.